Just call me an infant sat at the end of the classroom, 'cause I'm back, baby. Okay, so it's been a couple weeks since I've seen you. How have you been? I've been good, thank you for asking. I took some time to do absolutely nothing work related. All I did was bake and rewatch The Office. Finished my first ever crochet project, by the way, which is what I'm wearing right now. I love it. It makes me feel like a suburban mum. Like, watch, okay? Do you like some pancakes? That's a suburban mom, right? But I feel like it's perfectly fitting because we are in Pride Month and we love to represent. So, to ease back into the swing of things, I want to take a look at a topic that we've briefly touched on in a couple videos in the past, but I haven't actually dedicated an entire video to it until today. Today, we're going to try and make gradient maps work for us. This is heavily inspired by someone who is probably my #1 favorite artist of all time, Peter Moore-Barker, and we know that he uses it to tint his grayscale paintings and then paint over that, but today I want to explore some other possible uses for gradient maps as well, rather than just tinting our grayscale painting and acting as a base for our colors. Today we're going to work on a grayscale painting that I painted on Krita, but for the gradient maps bit we're going to have to switch to Photoshop because I don't know why, but even if I look at the gradient maps option on Krita, the entire thing crashes. Maybe it's just my computer being weird, but I can't lose any more brain cells trying to make gradient maps work on Krita, so we're gonna have to use Photoshop for this. As always, if you enjoyed this video and learned something today, then please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and check out my Patreon for even more tutorials every single week. But without much further ado, let's make gradient maps work for us. Alright, to start off, I've gone ahead and painted this piece in grayscale because that allows us to explore way more when it comes to gradient maps. It's a straightforward piece, just a girl, some flowers, and a piece of string to add a bit of movement. I kind of have some colors in mind, but for the most part, we're just gonna let the gradient maps take us where they want to. Also, really quick, I want to let you guys know there is a super useful alternative to the liquify tool in Krita. If you've used liquify in Krita, you've probably noticed that it is slow, glitchy, and unpredictable. And so I've always had to switch back and forth between Krita and Photoshop just to use the liquify tool, which is just a sinkhole for painting time. However, as it turns out, you don't actually have to use liquify in Krita. You can use a brush that comes in the Krita 4 bundle called Distort Move. It basically turns the liquify tool into a brush and is way less glitchy. Plus, you don't have to wait for it to create a preview and then apply the changes. You're essentially painting the changes in. I thought I'd share this with you guys because oh my god, it is a blessing. Okay, anyway, that was a tangent. Let's get into the actual video. Okay, so all through May, we did a lot of classical art workflows, and man, I'm telling you, I didn't even make this decision consciously, but apparently we're gonna incorporate that into our process permanently. So the very first thing we're gonna do with our gradient maps is to create an umber underpainting. Except since we've already got the painting done in grayscale, all we're gonna do is change the color of it. We wanna be mindful here of how gradient maps work. They basically assign a spectrum of colors to the existing spectrum of values. So the color to your right on the spectrum replaces the white, and the color to your left replaces the black, and all the in-between colors are mapped to their respective values. This is why we want to paint in grayscale first, because it allows us to see just the values, so that when we do apply the gradient map, it's not thrown off because we didn't get the values right. I hope that makes sense. So now that we know this, when it comes to creating a gradient map for our underpainting, we can use what we know of paint. We know that the light tones can be really pale, but also that the darkest tone isn't a black, but it is a dark burnt umber tone. I just started with any random gradient and replaced the colors at the lightest and darkest ends of the gradient. However, while the preview got close to looking like an underpainting, it felt a little flat. So I went in and added a slightly more saturated midtone at the center of the spectrum. This gives us a more realistic underpainting because it better mimics the halftones you would see from diluting the umber. I then switched back to Krita and hand painted in the greyscale bits where I wanted a cooler tone. You could do this with a second gradient map, but you'd have to mess with the opacity of the colors, and I just find it easier to do it by hand. And here is the underpainting we have so far. One thing I should mention is that when I create gradient maps on Photoshop, I like to do them as adjustment layers. What this means is, instead of directly applying the map to the painted layer itself, the map is assigned its own layer. This is better for 3 reasons. First, it is non-destructive and still editable, if that's a word. This means that the underpainting itself is unaffected by the map. I can delete the gradient map at any time and the underpainting will still be there. Plus, because the map has its own layer, I can always go in and edit the map, change colors, shift things around. It is totally flexible. Secondly, because it is a layer, we have the ability to use blending modes. We'll look at this a little more closely later on in the video, but yeah, you can set the map to multiply or screen or overlay. And finally, the biggest reason, and this is what we're going to use right now, is that when the map is on its own layer, you can apply a layer mask. And that allows us to use multiple gradients, but apply them only to very specific areas. So here, for instance, let's start with a gradient for the skin. I started again with a 2-color gradient and changed all of the colors, added a bunch of midtones and color variation, tones I would never use in a skin normally, but they seem to work really well here. And I saved this gradient as skin just in case I need it again later. Now, as you can see, the gradient has been applied to the entire character layer, so the skin, the hair, the eyes, all of it, but we only want it localized to the skin. So I'm gonna select the layer mask and paint it black to make the whole map disappear. And then I went in with white and only painted on the skin, and this way we make sure that the map is only visible in areas where we want it to be. I did the same thing with the hair and then also added an extra layer set to color blending mode and painted in some details that didn't really need gradient maps of their own. And again, with the flowers, we're gonna do a gradient map for the lighter petals, one for the darker petals, and a little tiny one for the fluffy bits. I legitimately looked it up and it's called a beard. Anyway, that thing gets its own gradient map. And just to save time, I copied the same map to the flowers behind her head as well, though I did have to change up the layer mask. So here's what we have after step 2. Alright, this is a trick I learned from the Cynic's technique tryout video, but you can use a gradient map to turn any surface metallic. We're going to use this on the string to make it look super glossy and reflective. First, we want to create the metallic gradient. Just to save myself some thinking time, I imported an image of some actual metallic tubes, and I'm going to use this to color pick a gradient from. The key to creating a metal gradient is to have tons of colors and to put dark and light colors next to each other very often. So as you can see here, I did just that, color picking dark and light tones and throwing in high contrast elements just very randomly. Even just looking at the gradient, you can tell it looks like metal, right? So I saved this gradient as metal and applied it to the ribbon thingy. It looked a little too choppy though, so I did go in and make a bunch of adjustments till it started to look like what I had in mind. I also wanted to color the ribbon ribbon red, so I added a second gradient map. Now, this is where blending modes come in handy because we don't want to lose any of that metal underneath. So we're going to set this gradient to color. I also played with the blending mode of the metal layer. Luminosity is a great mode if you want to preserve the color but change the values of the area to look more metallic. And here's what we have after step 3. Finally, let's look at using gradient maps to create some special effects. This bit is super intuitive because I'm just grabbing random gradients, messing with the blending mode, getting some super cool effects. I just wanted to show you guys how you can experiment with this step, messing with the values and such, really exploring stylistic choices. Again, because the gradient map has its own layer, you can always delete it and start over. I experimented with the overall lighting, maybe even giving her some alien-y patterns on her skin. Honestly, I really love the teal on her face, but ended up not using it in the end because there was just so much going on in the painting already. I know, apparently on my time off, I've worked on tempering my too much gene, but since there was already so much noise with the flowers and the string/ribbon thing, I wanted to make her face feel like a quiet zone for the viewer's eye to rest on. I also thought about echoing the teal in her face with some leaves in the background, but again, too much going on, it was just really distracting. I did still want some of that leaf imagery though, so instead I went in and added some subtle white leaf patterns in the background. That way it's not adding too much noise, but you still have extra shapes to break up the background, making the face the only quiet zone in the painting. And while you watch me paint, I just quickly want to let you guys know about some changes I'll be making to the content on here. Well, it's one big change really. The reason I needed a break was because I was burnt out. Since like last January last year, I've been working pretty much 7 days a week, 10 hours a day, and only took a 2-week break for the holidays. And honestly, it is not sustainable to be doing so much and still expect my art to grow and creativity to stick with my tired brain. So instead, we're gonna take it easy. Don't worry, I'll still be posting a new tutorial every week, but I thought maybe every alternate week we could have a mini tutorial, like less than 5 minutes in like a reel or YouTube short format. They'll still be just as good and helpful, but I've gathered so many little tips that I want to share with you guys, but it's not big enough to make a 10 to 12 minute long video about. And I definitely don't want to be one of those creators who just drags a topic out to hit the 10-minute mark. Mostly because I don't have the patience to add filler to my videos. So since we've had a long video this week, next week we'll have a mini tutorial. What do you think? Do you like this idea? I feel like it would be so much easier on my brain and will effectively give me a week and a half to work on the longer videos, meaning they'll be much better quality overall. Let me know what you think in the comments and we'll have a little trial run next week and see how it goes from there, yeah? So with that said, here is this week's finished painting, Iris. So what do you think? Do you like the idea of using gradient maps to add color to your grayscale paintings? Do you feel that it's an extra step that you just can't be bothered with? Personally, I don't know how I feel about it because on the one hand, I did really enjoy adding extra colors in my color palette that I wouldn't normally use. But on the other hand, I did have to switch to Photoshop, which is just a little too cumbersome for the way I'm set up personally, so... But let me know what you think in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this video and learned something today, then please do let me know by giving it a big thumbs up and hitting that subscribe button down below. I super appreciate it. It really helps this channel reach way more people and we can all be better artists together. And if you want to grab some custom art that I make just for you, then you can always check out my commissions. They're open. The link is in the video description. Or you can support this channel by checking out my Patreon or just come say hi on Instagram or Discord. All of the links are always in the video description. section below. But with all of that said, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Check out some more videos up here and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye!